As a free man, I take pride in the words, I'm a jelly donut.
Upper Michigan, God's country as it were. Vast forests, beautiful scenery, breathtaking sights. A small town in the middle of nowhere, that's where I come from. Whereas Americans, we proudly wave the flag and stand for the flag. But in 2011, I married my wife, got on a plane, and moved to Germany. And so after being here for 10 years, I decided it's time to tell my story and share my experiences as an American in Germany. So follow me, a normal dude with a GoPro, a drone, and sometimes a fancier camera, and I'll show you what it's like here. Come with me and experience life in Germany. The inventor of the language seems to have taken pleasure in complicating it in every way he could think of, from the awful German language. Mark Twain. So, did President John F. Kennedy really proclaim himself to be a jelly-filled pastry? No. Maybe. Sorta. I can see why all of these answers would be correct in some way. And if you dive into German and learn a little bit more about it, you'll see why. In German, when you are a citizen of a certain country or a city, or if you're proclaiming to be a certain profession, you generally leave out the indefinite article. That would be like a or an. So in this case, if I say in English, I'm a paramedic, I'm a nurse, I'm an American, or I'm American. Notice the last one, I left out the indefinite article. It's the same way in German, but usually that's how they keep it that way. I am an American or I am American essentially means the same thing.
And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
So where does Kennedy potentially run amok? So if he was just saying that he was from Berlin, or that he was of Berlin or whatever, he would say, Ich bin Berliner. But he didn't. He said, Ich bin ein Berliner. And because people would argue because he put the ein in there that he's actually referring to a pastry, because he's not saying in the normal way that you would say I'm from Berlin or I'm a Berlinite or whatever. Because he didn't say that he's essentially calling himself this jelly filled donut thing that is also known in Germany. Interestingly enough, they don't call this pastry in Berlin a Berliner. They call it a Pfannkuchen. But in the rest of Germany, they call it a Berliner. So if he was using that in Berlin, he's technically not using it then to call himself a jelly donut because he's in Berlin and they don't use that term for that. So do you kind of see how that's getting a little bit confusing and a little ambiguous? Although maybe today some people would argue that when you say Ich bin ein Amerikaner, that would actually also be correct. But then you could also be a jelly, or you could also be a pastry, because there's actually a cookie that's called an Amerikaner, and you would also essentially be declaring yourself a cookie, but you know. So technically he wasn't calling himself a donut, but because he used the article, it could be construed that he was calling himself a donut, even though he himself didn't desire and intend to call himself a donut, and all the people in West Berlin also understood what he meant. So my point is that language can be a lot more complex and intricate than you may initially think, and it can be that added extra spice of life culturally, especially when you get more into it and you start learning more about it. So if you've ever learned a foreign language, you know it's challenging, and you know it can be a lot of fun, but it can also be annoying, irritating, frustrating, all those different things. But when you learn a different language, you're forced to see how other people think, how they process information, either in the same fashion or a different fashion. in comparison to you. A perfect example of this would be when you say in English, for example, he was lucky. He was lucky. But in German, they have a colorful way of saying hat Schwein gehabt, which literally means, when you translate it, he had pig. And if you look in, so when you think of that right away, that might sound totally confusing to you. It doesn't make sense. But if you look into it and you do a little bit of research, or in my case, I just asked my coworkers what in the world that meant, or why they say that. In older times, lots of people weren't fortunate enough to have meat. And whenever they did have meat, usually they had pork. So they had pigs. When they were lucky enough to have meat, catch it, the lucky enough there to have meat, they usually had pigs or pork. So that's why they say, hat Schwein gehabt. So it's really interesting when you look into it, why in the world they say that. It sounds bizarre at first, but then when you look into it, it makes perfect sense. So that's kind of cool. When you learn another language, you're also forced to learn how people transcribe their language from the spoken form into the written form, which is also very interesting. And this is where in German I find it a lot easier actually to pronounce German words compared to like French, where they leave out half the word. Like if you say parler, they leave out the ER at the, or they leave out the R at the end until it comes to the next word. But in German, or even in English, for example, when you say through something, you have the GH on the end, but you don't say anything. That can be actually confusing. Whereas in German, every letter is pronounced. Like you have, for example, Straße, S-T-R-A-S-S-E, Straße. Every letter is pronounced. There's nothing that's left out. I find that it makes things a lot more simple in German. The part where I get hung up is when you start putting the accents on the letters. In German, you have O, A, and E. No, sorry, O, A, and U, where you can put the two dots above them. It's called the umlaut. And for example, the O becomes Ü. So like Trüdel. See, I'm probably even saying it wrong, but I have a problem with when you say Trüdel, means like junk. Or when you say, a little bit easier for me is with the U, with the U, with the umlaut. That would be like über. And in English you just say Uber. But in German it's actually über. And I run into a problem where I say, when I'm trying to say it's humid outside, I say schwül, which would be correct, I think. But sometimes I say schwul, which means gay. It's written the same way except for the two little dots in there. So if you don't get the Ü and you say ul, then you're essentially, and you say to somebody, you're trying to say it's humid, but it might come out, oh, it's really gay today, or today is really gay. So that can complicate things a little bit, or make it a funny instance, I guess. You can also do that with the A. The A in German is usually a short A, so like Angst. It says A, Angst. But if you have the umlaut over it, then it becomes an A, like Ega. Or probably like lots of people in America are familiar with Jägermeister. It's not Jägermeister, it's Jägermeister. So one of the things I love about German, and you can kind of see that it fits hand in hand with a lot of scientists. When you think of scientists, you think of logical people. You think of simple terms for things so that everybody can understand what you're talking about. So like in German, when you take the word, for example, skunk, and you put it into German, it means Stinktier, which literally means stink animal. So it's super logical what that means, right? You can even say, for example, a sloth is a lazy animal. In German, it literally means, you say Faultier, lazy animal. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Another cool example would be watch, like a hand watch. It's called Armbanduhr, which Armband, which means armband, like a bracelet, and Uhr, which means clock. So it's a bracelet clock, an Armbanduhr, a watch, a hand watch. So it really makes sense. It's really cool how that's so logical. And my most favorite one of all, I'm a World War II buff, a history buff, especially German army stuff, history stuff, is flak. When you hear like people say, I'm catching flak, well, that actually comes from Flugabwehrkanone, which literally means flight defensive cannon. So it can't get any more logical than that. So that's pretty cool. So German is very logical until it's not. Ugh. So, in English, we have an article. An indefinite article, which would be a, because you're not talking about one specific thing, and you have a definite article, which you are talking about a specific thing, a definite thing, which is the. That's all there is. There's either the, or a, or an, depending on if you use a vowel or whatever for the next word, right? In German, there are 3 types of articles. For example, in Spanish and French, there are 2. There's a masculine and a feminine form. El and la in Spanish. And in French, it would be le and la. In German, there's 3. You have der, which is masculine, die, feminine, das, which is neutral or neuter. Bear with me. Der Mann, the man, masculine. Die Frau, the woman, feminine. Der Junge, masculine, the boy. But das Mädchen, the girl, but neutral. So she doesn't have a gender. Everybody else has a gender except the girl. So it's like that with all kinds of other words in German too. There is no rhyme or reason necessarily for them. There's der Zug, which is masculine. And there's das Boot, which is neutral. But then there's also die Maschine, which is feminine. So sometimes there are rules, and you can kind of get them a little bit. Like when a word ends with an e at the end, then it's usually feminine, or along those lines. Or if it ends with a ung, then it's usually feminine. But with like masculine and neutral, it's anybody's guess. And I still to this day cannot get them all, and it's really frustrating because when you're trying to learn a language and you're trying to really learn it and do it well, I sit there and stammer and stutter sometimes, and I ask everybody, is it der, die, or das? I don't know. However, here's where it gets even more irritating when you have, and don't get me wrong, I like German, but it's very complicated sometimes and it's very irritating. If you have die Frau, which would be the woman, and it's feminine, right? So that all works. It's a woman and it's actually feminine. That changes if you give her something. So in German you have 4 different cases. If a subject does something to another object, it changes the initial article that comes before it. I'm not going to explain that all here, but in the case of like, I give the woman a coffee, I would say, ich gebe der Frau einen Kaffee. But I just use the article for der, which is normally a masculine article, but yet it's now showing that I'm giving it to this woman who's feminine. So it's really frustrating. So in German, to make things even more complicated and different, they have a bracketed system with the verbs. So if you say, for example, this week I will buy a new car in Munich. In German, you would say, diese Woche werde ich ein neues Auto in München kaufen. Which when you transcribe that literally means, I will, this week, a new car in Munich buy. So they put their they put their infinitive form of the verb at the end of the sentence, which can get really frustrating and really confusing when you have when you try to read a German newspaper. They write complicated enough when they write in German in a newspaper. I don't know why they do that. I think they like try to show off or something. But it gets really confusing because you have the start of the sentence, I will this week a car, blah, 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 blah. You finish the rest of it, buy comes at the very end. So by the time you get to the end of the sentence, you forgot what they were already doing. Or it even gets more confusing when you use a modal verb. A modal verb is, like I said, I'm not going to get into grammar here, but a modal verb would be like, in English it would be may, can, must. So I can go to the store, I must buy this, or whatever. In German, when you use a certain tense in German, it could be even more confusing because you put those two verbs at the very end. So you have two verbs at the end of the sentence now. For example, you might say, I wasn't able to call him. In German, you would say, ich habe ihn nicht anrufen können. When you translate that, literally, that comes out to be, I, him, not, call, could. I had to think about that a little bit. So it gets really convoluted in all kinds of weird stuff, but in German you just speak like that. So after a while you actually start to talk like that then. And then maybe you actually understand how Frank Oz got his inspiration for that green little guy, Yoda. When you think of like Attack of the Clones near the end of the movie when he says, around the survivors a perimeter create, then you understand where maybe that comes from. So I think Frank Oz got that from German. I can't verify that, but I think so. So with that, I hope you guys had fun. I know I definitely had fun, and it was really enlightening to come back and look at all these different aspects of the German language that unfortunately you start to forget after you've been here for so long. When you come here right away, they're fresh in your mind. You really pick up on them right away. They're big shiny objects that you kind of get fascinated with at some point. But then over time, you start to get Germanized and it just becomes normal, and you forget about it. And that's the unfortunate thing about not writing these things down right away. So I wish that over the years I would have done that. So that's why I'm trying to tell my story from being here in Germany now before I forget later on in life. So I hope that was fun for you guys. I hope you were able to learn from it and it was entertaining. And with that, I actually encourage you to get out there and learn a different language, whether it's German or anything else. It can be definitely a lot of fun and worthwhile. And like I said, it's that extra added spice in life. So we'll catch you guys later. Take care, and we'll see you next time. And please don't forget to like and subscribe, and even share this video with friends, family, or anybody who you know who might be interested in learning about Germany. Take care. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Mach's gut. Ciao.